Hi, this is Erin, and welcome to Everything EFL, my little podcast about English language teaching and other teachy stuff too. Credit and honourable mentions will be given during the episode or in the show notes. Let's crack on. Hello, you gorgeous teacher. How are you? If you are a new listener, you are most welcome. If you are one of my lovely regular listeners, welcome back. I am so happy you're still here. Welcome to the final episode of the year. I'm taking a big long break of about 6 or 7 weeks. I deserve it. It's going to happen. Anyway, we'll chat about that later. What are we talking about today? We are talking about presentations. It's kind of a natural follow-on from the projects episode, I think. Now, there's quite a lot in this episode. I've been planning it for ages. I just keep sort of amending it, but I want it to be as comprehensive and useful as possible and hopefully make you think when you do presentations with your students. So when you think of a presentation, how long does that usually take in a lesson? Do you do it over 1 or 2 lessons or something a bit longer? I generally tend to do it over at least a week. Why do I do that? Well, first of all, I think a step-by-step approach is definitely less overwhelming than just going, okay, you're going to do a presentation, we're going to do it tomorrow, okay? I think presentations should be done properly so students get into good habits from the start. So I'd like you to listen and consider what I'm going to tell you and see if you can pick up a few things from this episode that you can and will implement. Now, I'm not an expert, all right? I have picked up tips from people far more knowledgeable and intelligent than me. 2 of those people being my good friend Christine Mullaney. I hope I pronounced your surname right. And the delightfully mad Ian Brownlee. Both of them are on LinkedIn. Their details will be in the show notes, okay? So I've just listened to things they've said and advice that they have given me personally. And I'm going to approach this episode from 3 angles, okay? We're going to go linguistic, visual, and psychological. Now, does that last one surprise you? Well, why don't we begin with that one, because I think it's infinitely the most interesting. So why do we need to employ psychology here? Well, if you've seen any of my videos on Instagram or Facebook, you know that I firmly believe that confidence and trust are key factors in learning. These things need to be in place before students feel comfortable mentally to really just let go, speak, ask questions. You know, you're freeing up their brains to learn because the stress that maybe was there at the beginning isn't there now. And I would also say, don't underestimate the fear that presentations instill in some people. Now, a perfect example is just a few weeks ago, I had an adult student. She is around the age of 27, I would say. Great English, but not very confident. And the reason why she was nervous about doing a presentation in our class was because the last one she did, her teacher told her it was crap and it was like an elementary presentation. Now, I actually put this in one of my videos a few weeks ago, and you probably saw I was like visibly upset and angry. Anyway, that's another podcast. Let's keep on track here. So my question to you is, do you ever ask your students how they feel about giving presentations? I always do, okay? And you get a lot of negative answers. I feel nervous. I don't like them. Okay, let's dig deeper. Why? There's always a number of reasons, but it generally stems down to fear. You know, it could be fear of looking stupid. A lot of students are not confident with their pronunciation, judgment from the teacher or their peers, or maybe they're just generally quite shy and they just don't really speak that much, like in English classes, and now you're expecting them to stand up in front of their entire group and speak. You might as well be asking them to do it naked. That really sounded much better in my head. So advice? Well, okay. I always say, with anything that's kind of overwhelming, my mantra is everything is a process. So if you're looking at a mountain, how are you going to climb it? You break it down into manageable chunks, which is why doing it over a slightly longer period of time is good. You can approach the presentation bit by bit, and it also gives you a chance to address breathing. Okay, now we'll talk about that a little bit more in the pronunciation section, but you can also think about breathing in the way that, good breathing practices helps to calm and center yourself and your students. If you teach them how to breathe before the presentation, do it with them. Maybe incorporate it into your lesson, like every morning or every other day, you start or you finish your lesson with a little bit of breathing. Just before they do it for real in the presentation, it won't be something new that they haven't tried before or they've only tried once. They'll be well used to it. And it's also just a good way to incorporate some well-being and good general habits and practices for life. So I just went on YouTube when I was feeling quite anxious last year. And I just found a really nice little breathing activity. And I've since used it in class quite a few times. And students seem to really embrace it and really enjoy it. And, I make sure that every student knows how to breathe before they do a presentation. Anyway, let's go back to our breaking it down thing. I would give them a timeline or an agenda of what exactly you want to achieve over the next week or 2 weeks or whatever. Give them the essential information or requirements or instructions in just like an easy to digest PowerPoint or just Word document, just real simple examples. And then you can give them some hints for the structure, which we'll talk about in a moment. I would give them a deadline to decide on a topic, but I would, as much as you can, give them the choice of what they want to talk about, okay? This creates autonomy, engagement, motivation. They're researching something that they're really into, so they're going to learn. And speaking of choice, is it absolutely necessary they do it alone? Could they do it with a partner if they really wanted? Maybe they need the support of another person. Maybe they're not ready to do it on their own yet. Fine. I don't see a problem with that. So where do we start? Okay. So I always start with, once you have the topic, get them to choose maybe 3 or so sections. Break down the topic into 2 or 3 sections. I think this helps students focus on the content too. And then you talk about the agenda. How are you going to introduce what you're going to say in your presentation? So give them just a really super easy example of the language needed. So let's say they're doing something about Dolly Parton. First, I'm going to talk about Dolly Parton's childhood. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how she got famous. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about her style and fashion choices. Okay, so you're using super simple language. First, secondly, finally, or thirdly, or whatever it is I said. I can't remember. And this is a nice way also to introduce a little bit of intonation and pausing. But we'll talk about that a little bit more in the pronunciation section. So once they've chosen their topic and they have their 3 or so sections that they're going to do, you can actually get students starting to write the opening of their presentation and get that ball rolling. So I always say to them, okay, go away, homework or whatever. Your first sentence is going to be a greeting and thanks for coming. Give them that sentence if they can't do it themselves. Second sentence, what are you going to talk about? Today, I'm going to talk about And number 3, your agenda. First, I'm going to talk about Second, I'm going to talk about And finally, I'm going to talk about There you go. You've just created your opening. And then they can go home and create the title slide and the agenda slide as well. So they've got a starting point. They've actually started writing the presentation. Okay, and then it might be an idea to mention a couple of important things here as they start to gather content and write their presentation. Firstly, talk about a hook. What is a hook? It's usually something in the form of a question or a story that will attract and hold the listener's attention at the beginning. You could also have another hook somewhere in the middle if you like to keep the audience's attention. And this should be the first time of many that you remind your students of the listener, okay? Because they sometimes tend to forget that the listener is more important. So always keep the listener in mind. Also, when you're practicing this, I've found that a lot of students kind of rush and they'll ask the listeners or audience a question as they're practicing, and they'll leave absolutely no time for the audience to process that question. So it could be something like, we're going to start with a question. Have you ever played football? Well, anyway, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, hold on a minute, give them a chance to actually think about the question. So it should come out something like, have you ever played football? Blah, 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 blah. And the second thing is that signposting language that we are all familiar with. So when you're changing a slide or you're changing topic, you're using those phrases like, let's move on to this. We've just discussed this and now we're going to do this. I've just talked about this, so let's move on to that kind of stuff. You can Google that. There are millions of examples of signposting. Furnish your students with this language. Make sure they use it every time they're changing topic or they're going to a new section. And you can tell them that the reason this is important is because Again, reminding them of the listener. The listener's brain is going on a journey when they're listening to it, kind of like this constant stream of information. And that's what it is. Like, when you've got a script and you're actually doing the presentation, you know, it's easy to forget that the people listening, they need a little bit of time to digest, to process. And these phrases, basically help the brain navigate, okay? It's a really good thing because it's so simple as well. These phrases are so simple. And even at low levels, the concept and the language is relatively simple. So that's like a really nice thing that you can just add on there. I would also encourage practicing, okay, not just at home. Can you allocate a little bit of time in your lessons, especially if you're doing it over a longer period of time, even if it's like 10 minutes? Can they practice what they've done so far with a partner or a small group? It might make the presentation at the end a bit less overwhelming if they've done it in front of a couple of people in the class. They've got used to, listening to the sound of their own voice and maybe even getting feedback from that group as well. You might get one student who just really doesn't want to do the presentation, okay? I would still encourage them to go through all the stages of producing and practicing, but I wouldn't force them to actually present. Maybe they're just not ready. Maybe they'll change their mind when they see others doing it or, once they've got into the little groups and they're practicing together. Maybe they won't. But getting them to do all that other prep leading up to the actual presentation, you might think to yourself, well, surely it's a waste of time then. I would argue it's absolutely not. They chose the topic, so they were engaged in the research and the writing. Maybe they really enjoyed it. They've learned something and, they've learned how to breathe as well if you choose to incorporate that into your plan. So, yeah, just, food for thought, guys, food for thought. So let's move on to the sort of practical linguistic and pronunciation-y stuff, okay? So the first stage, like I said, is give the students a chance to choose the topic and research it. The next is to write the script. Now, you might argue it's not good to actually get them to write a full script, but I always get them to do it. And then, depending on their level of ability or confidence, they can then, again, they can choose to reduce it down to note form if they're confident doing that. Introducing pronunciation. Now, some teachers are confident with this, some are not. Fine. But if you're not confident, I would suggest one really simple thing you can do, okay? Breathing, pausing. The easiest thing to get your students to do is if they have a full stop or a comma anywhere in their script, that's a good place to start. Full stop, breathe. Comma, breathe. I wish I'd take my own advice. I did a presentation not long ago for ELT Ireland online, and I did have a lot to say in a very short time. But I was like a freaking machine gun. It was ridiculous. Like I was like, and then you have to do this, and then you have to do this. So I totally didn't take my own advice there. But they do say that teachers make the worst students, don't they? Anyway, back to pausing and breathing. Full stops, commas. If you have a slightly longer sentence, I always say another good place to pause and breathe is just before those conjunctions like and, but, and so. Again, just a little breath, like a half breath, if you will. And again, it gives students listening a little bit of time to process the information as well. So I'm just going to give you an example sentence here. This presentation is about the legend of country music and all-round superwoman of the world, Dolly Parton. Now I'm going to do it with a couple of pauses. This presentation is about the legend of country music and all-round superwoman of the world, Dolly Parton. Okay, I hope you heard the difference there. You could also do some sentence stress work, some intonation work. It depends how confident you are, and it also depends on how much time you have and you want to devote to it. But you get the idea. The more you can accomplish in terms of pronunciation depends on the level and the ability and the time and how they respond to it as well. Okay, on to visuals. I asked Ian Brownlee for some advice, and he gave me 5 really simple, no-nonsense pieces of advice. Some of these may seem obvious to you, but they might not be to your students. How many students have created PowerPoints? Not all of them. I'm going to use Ian's words here. So number 1, place a title on every slide. Use the same font, text size and style, and this primes the audience for the speaker's message on this slide. Again, going back to the listener. Number 2, When moving on to a new section, instead of going straight to the new slide with the content of the next part, use a separator slide with the basic content of the new area. So basically, what's to come. Again, thinking about, your listener's brain going on a journey. All of this helps them just process and navigate. Number 3, remove any and all redundant, and I quote, crap from every slide. Anything that has no useful purpose just increases the cognitive load and complexity, which affects attention and memory. Speaking of that, I often find that students, when they're not used to making PowerPoints, they will write full sentences on the slide. And I always say to them, when you go onto this slide with this full sentence, as a listener, what do I do? Where do I look? Look at the slide. Okay, so what do I stop doing? I stop listening. Okay, monitor your students' PowerPoints and make sure that, they're really just minimal language so that, listeners can just kind of look at the key phrases there and then they can use their script or their bullet points to elaborate. Number 4, place important images on the right-hand side of the slides. Why? No idea. Number 5, this is interesting, I think. Animate the entry of new material onto the slide. Okay, so in PowerPoint, the zoom animation is excellent because anything that approaches us automatically attracts our attention. Isn't that interesting? And finally, again, optional, give the students watching time to come up with a question at the end of the presentation to ask. Now, you could give them time to think individually or think in groups. For lower levels or weak students, obviously this is going to be a bit more difficult, but just try and see what they come up with. You never know. You could maybe just say, look, if you're on a table of 4, can you come up with one question? That's fine. That's fine. Give the listening students time to do this. And then that gives you time to write a bit of feedback. Now, I always give my students a little bit of written feedback, even if it's in the form of like a very quick email. You can have your laptop there and kind of type as you are listening. And then when the students are trying to come up with questions, you can kind of finish it off. Ideally, finish with a really nice positive phrase, okay? Like I said, you could email them or maybe fill in a specially designed evaluation form if that's your thing. Maybe a little bit too formal, but lots of positive comments, giving them a few pointers, very kindly worded, obviously. For example, it would benefit if you spoke a little slower so listeners can appreciate all that fantastic language you used. Now, praise, again, I just don't think you can praise students enough. Obviously, if it's awful, don't tell them it was amazing, but you can still be kind. And especially if the students were shy and you know that doing this presentation was hard for them, heap that praise upon them. Always take the time to give them some feedback. And I just think it rounds off the whole process nicely and it gives that bit of validation that, for all the work that the students have put in. So you might think that doing a presentation is just a matter of sort of sending them away to research something and come back with a PowerPoint and a script, but ask yourself whether you want to just tick that box of, we did a presentation, or do you want your students to go away feeling more confident, better about themselves, and that maybe some of them have overcome a genuine fear or personal learning barrier and really achieved something. And like I said, it will instill some really good presentation habits for the future. Have I missed something out? I'm pretty sure I have. Like I said, not an expert. This is just like 2 weeks ago with the projects. This is just stuff that I've picked up and I've learned. So, if you want to comment and give me some advice, by all means do. I'd be happy to hear from you on social media. Everything EFL Teacher on Instagram, and my private Facebook group is Everything EFL Teacher Development. I would absolutely love to hear from you. Now, this is my last episode for the year. I'm going to have a big long break over Christmas and the New Year. I'm working on a lot of other ideas as well, which I'm really excited about. I'm planning on launching some kind of teacher training course, possibly around March. And I've said it here to make myself accountable, okay? So in the meantime, just keep watching my content on the social medias. Message me if you want. I love hearing from teachers. And I will be back end of January, beginning of February with a new episode. In the meantime, there's a little back catalogue there of past episodes. By all means, have a listen. And, I'm always willing to listen to your feedback, guys. All contact details and all the information you need is on the show notes. I'm just going to mention Christine and Ian again for the advice and tips. You will find both of them on LinkedIn. If you celebrate Christmas, happy Christmas. Have a lovely, peaceful holiday. If you don't celebrate Christmas, have a happy and peaceful rest of December and New Year. I'll see you next year with new episodes, new content, new guests. I've got a big long list of people I'm going to email in December. And we can also, commiserate together on how we've all broken our New Year's resolutions. So thank you for a great year and for all your support. You know who you are. Bye.